the medical bay aboard the Earth Coalition flagship. Indomitable was smaller than a storage closet in the Valorian Imperial Palace. But Princess Sareth had refused to leave it for 3 days. She sat beside Commander Yoon's bed in a chair that had been brought specifically for her. Her silver hands wrapped around a cup of human tea that had long since gone cold. Her 4 eyes fixed on the face of the woman who had saved her life. The doctors had said Yoon would survive. But the first 2 days had been touch and go. A constant battle against blood loss and infection, and the accumulated damage of fighting an entire army with nothing but determination and borrowed weapons. Sareth had watched every moment of that battle, refusing to sleep, refusing to eat more than the minimum necessary to keep herself alive, speaking to no one except to demand updates on Yoon's condition. Her father had sent messages expressing his relief at her survival and his confusion at her behavior. Sisters had sent messages mocking her attachment to a human of all creatures. The Valorian court had sent messages reminding her of her duties and responsibilities. Shaz had ignored all of them. On the morning of the 4th day, Yoon's eyes opened. She looked around the unfamiliar room with the alertness of someone who had spent too many years waking up in dangerous places, and her hand moved automatically toward a weapon that was not there. "You are safe," Sarah said quickly. "We are aboard your human flagship. The Shathan have been driven back, and you have been unconscious for 3 days. Yoon's eyes found the princess and widened with surprise. "Your Highness, what are you doing here? Waiting for you to wake up." "Obviously, that seems." Yoon paused as if searching for the right word. "Unexpected." Sareth laughed, and the sound was nothing like the cold crystal chimes she had produced at the diplomatic reception. "Yes, I suppose it does." The arrogant princess watching over the primitive human. "The galaxy has truly turned upside down." She set aside the cold tea and leaned forward. "I need to say something to you. Something I should have said before you decided to nearly die for my sake." "You already apologized," Yoon reminded her. "I already accepted. That was a battlefield apology, made in desperation when I thought I might never get another chance. This is different. This is the apology I want you to remember." Sareth took a breath and met Yoon's eyes with a directness that felt alien to her Valorian sensibilities. "I was taught from birth that the Valorian Empire stood at the peak of galactic civilization, that other species existed beneath us in a hierarchy of worth determined by lifespan and technology and ancient bloodlines. I believed this teaching without question because I had never experienced anything that challenged it." She reached out and took Yoon's hand in her own. "You challenged it. Not with words or arguments, but with actions that spoke louder than any speech. You showed me that courage is not determined by how long a creature lives, but by what that creature chooses to do with the time it has. You showed me that protection is not a duty performed by servants, but a gift offered freely between equals. You showed me that I was wrong about everything I thought I knew." Yoon's fingers tightened around Sareth's hand. "Your Highness, I was just doing my job." "No." Sareth shook her head firmly. "You were being human. And being human turned out to be something far more impressive than I ever imagined." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment. And when Yoon spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. "What happens now? You return to your empire, and I return to mine. And we pretend this never happened." "Absolutely not." Sareth stood and walked to the small window that looked out on the stars, her silver skin catching the light of distant suns. "I have been in contact with my father. The Emperor was already grateful to humanity for saving his daughter. But when I told him the full story of what you did, he agreed that something more than gratitude was required." She turned back to face Yoon with an expression that held none of the cruelty or arrogance that had defined her before. "In 1 month, when you are recovered and able to travel, there will be a ceremony at the restored convocation hall. My father will offer Earth a full alliance with the Valorian Empire. Not as a junior partner or charity case, but as equals. And I will be the one to announce it." Yoon stared at her in disbelief. "Your Highness." "That is, I do not know what to say. Say you will be there. Say you will let me tell the galaxy what you did and what it meant. Say you will give me the chance to prove that I can be more than the spoiled princess who mocked you at a party." 1 month later, Sarath stood before the assembled representatives of 30 species in the rebuilt convocation hall and spoke words that would echo through history. "I come before you today to admit that I was wrong," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Many of you were present when I publicly humiliated a human officer at the reception before the Shathan attack. I called her species primitive. I called them noise in the void. I suggested they were unworthy of attention or respect." She paused and looked at Commander Yoon, who stood in full dress uniform among the human delegation. "That human officer saved my life. She fought through impossible odds, took wounds that would have killed most Valorians, and offered her own existence in exchange for mine. She did this not for reward or recognition, but simply because I needed help. And in her culture, that is reason enough." Sarath's voice grew stronger. "Humans are not primitive. They are not noise in the void. They are what we should all aspire to be. Strong enough to fight when fighting is necessary. Wise enough to know when peace is the better path. And compassionate enough to help even those who have wronged them." She extended her hand toward the human delegation. "On behalf of my father, Emperor Keth Valoria the Undying, I offer the people of Earth a full alliance with our empire. We ask for your friendship, your partnership, and your example as we try to become a species worthy of standing beside you." Ambassador Torvik stepped forward and accepted her hand. And the chamber erupted in applause that continued for several minutes later. When the ceremony was over and the diplomats had scattered to discuss the implications of what they had witnessed, Sarath found Yoon standing alone on a balcony overlooking the planet below. "You did well," Yoon said. "That was quite a speech. I meant every word. I know. That is what made it work." They stood together watching the lights of the city spread across the night side of the planet. Two beings from different worlds who had found something unexpected in each other. "Can I ask you something?" Sarath said finally. "Of course. I was terrible to you. I was cruel and arrogant and said things that should have earned your hatred. Yet you risked everything to save me anyway. I understand the principle you explained about helping those who need it, but I still wonder. Did any part of you want to leave me behind?" Yoon was quiet for a long moment. "When I was young, there was a boy in my village who bullied me relentlessly. He mocked my family, threw stones at me, made my life miserable for years. Then, one winter he fell through the ice on a frozen lake. And I was the only one close enough to reach him. What did you do?" "I pulled him out. I saved his life, even though part of me wanted to walk away. And do you know what happened after that? He became your friend." Yoon smiled and shook her head. "No. He remained a terrible person who continued to treat others badly, but I never regretted saving him. Because who I am is not determined by how others behave toward me, but by the choices I make in response." She turned to face Sarath. "You are not that boy. You learned from your experience. You grew and changed. And that makes every wound I took worth it." Sarath felt tears forming in her eyes again. A sensation she was becoming disturbingly familiar with. "I want us to be friends," she said. "Not allies, not political partners, but actual friends. Is that possible?" Yoon reached out and took her hand the way she had in the medical bay. "We already are friends." "Your Highness, you just did not know it yet." Sarath laughed and squeezed the human's hand. "Please, call me Sarath. I think we are beyond titles now. Sarath it is." Then, they stood together on the balcony as the stars wheeled overhead. A princess and a soldier, a Valorian and a human. Two friends who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. The universe watched and wondered what other surprises humanity had in store. The plan was simple in its structure and terrifying in its implications. Commander Yoon would create a distraction by attacking the Shathan force from the far end of the corridor, drawing their attention and their firepower away from the transmitter room while Princess Sarah slipped in through a maintenance access point and activated the emergency beacon. The beacon would broadcast their location and status to any allied forces in the system, including the Earth Coalition Rapid Response Fleet that had been stationed nearby for the duration of the summit. It was a good plan, logical and efficient, and it would almost certainly result in Yoon's death. No, Sarah said when she understood what the human was proposing. This is unacceptable. I will not allow you to sacrifice yourself for me. Yoon checked the power cell on her stolen rifle with the casual efficiency of someone who had performed the action thousands of times. With respect, Your Highness, you do not get to decide that I am a princess of the Valorian Empire. My word is law in 11 star systems. We are not in one of those star systems right now. We are in a damaged station, overrun by enemies who want us dead. And the only law that matters here is survival. Sareth grabbed Yoon's arm with a strength that surprised both of them. You said protection is a choice. Then I am choosing to protect you. I refuse to let you die for someone who treated you as less than nothing. Yoon looked at the hand on her arm and then at the face of the alien princess, and something in her expression softened. That is not how it works. Your Highness, I appreciate the sentiment. I truly do. But the mathematics of this situation are simple. You are royalty. Your survival matters to billions of Valorians who depend on the stability of your father's rule. I am one human soldier among millions. The trade is not even close to fair. Fair. Sarah spat the word like a curse. You speak of fairness when you are about to throw your life away for someone who mocked everything you are. I am throwing my life away for someone who needs help. Yoon corrected gently. The fact that you were unkind to me before does not change that. If anything, it makes it more important. How can you say that? Yoon smiled. And there was something in that smile that Sareth had never seen before. A peace that seemed completely at odds with the violence that surrounded them. Because if I only helped people who were nice to me, I would not be worth much as a person, would I? The true test of character is not how we treat our friends, but how we treat those who give us no reason to be kind. You showed me your worst self at that reception. Now I'm going to show you my best self. And maybe someday you will understand why that matters. She gently removed Sarath's hand from her arm and turned toward the corridor. The maintenance access is 20 meters to your left. It will be tight, but you should fit. Once you hear the fighting start, move quickly and do not look back. Activate the beacon and then find somewhere to hide until rescue arrives. Yoon, Sarah said. And the use of the human's name without title or contempt surprised them both. I am sorry for what I said at the reception. I was cruel and arrogant and wrong about everything. I know, Yoon replied. Apology accepted. Now get ready to move. She disappeared around the corner before Sareth could say anything else. The sound of weapons fire erupted moments later, accompanied by the screams of Shathan warriors caught off guard by an attack from an unexpected direction. Sareth ran. The maintenance access was exactly where Yoon had said it would be. A narrow tube that forced the princess to crawl on her hands and knees through darkness that smelled of oil and burnt metal behind her. The sounds of battle grew louder and then shifted, suggesting that the Shathan were pursuing their attacker away from the transmitter. Yoon's distraction was working. Zrath emerged into the transmitter room covered in grime and shaking with emotions she did not have names for. Her elegant gown reduced to rags, her silver hair matted with sweat and blood that was both her own and borrowed from her. unlikely protector, the room was empty except for the massive console that dominated its center. Its displays flickering with damage but still functional. Sareth had never operated such equipment herself. That was what servants and technicians were for. But she had watched them often enough to understand the basic principles. She found the emergency beacon controls and began the activation sequence. Her fingers trembling on the unfamiliar interface. The sounds of fighting outside changed again, coming closer now. And Sareth realized with horror that the Shathan had figured out the deception. A warrior burst through the door with weapons raised. Its compound eyes finding Sareth immediately, she screamed and threw herself to the side as plasma fire scorched the air where she had been standing. Her mind emptying of everything except pure survival instinct. The Shathan advanced, and Sareth saw death approaching in the form of claws and chitin and cold alien hunger, something deep inside her. Something that had been dormant her entire privileged life. Suddenly woke up, she grabbed a piece of broken equipment from the floor and hurled it at the warrior's face. Not because she thought it would hurt the creature, but because Yoon had taught her that movement was life and stillness was death. The Shathan batted the debris aside, but its attention shifted for just a moment. And in that moment, Sareth lunged for the console and slammed her hand down on the activation control. The beacon flared to life, broadcasting its signal across the entire system. The Shathan shrieked in rage and raised its weapon to finish here. Figure crashed through the damaged ceiling and landed on the warrior's back with an impact that drove both of them to the ground. She was covered in blood, her uniform barely recognizable, wounds visible across every part of her body. But she was still fighting with the same terrible ferocity that Sareth had witnessed before. The human and the Shathan struggled on the floor in a tangle of limbs and claws, and desperate, violent Sareth did not think. She simply acted. She grabbed the fallen Shathan weapon and aimed it at the warrior's head, waiting for a moment when Yoon was clear. The moment came and Sareth fired. The weapon's recoil threw her backward. But the shot found its target. The Shathan collapsed and did not move again. Yoon pushed the corpse aside and tried to stand, but her legs would not support her. Too much blood lost. Too many wounds accumulated over hours of impossible combat. She fell. Sareth caught her before she hit the ground, cradling the human's broken body with a gentleness that would have seemed impossible from the arrogant princess of just hours ago. The beacon, Yoon whispered, her voice barely audible. It is active, Sareth told her. Help is coming. You need to stay awake. You need to hold on. Yoon smiled with blood-stained lips. You fought, she said. You killed that one yourself. Maybe you are not so different from humans after all. Be quiet, Sareth ordered, tears streaming down her silver face. Save your strength, Your Highness. I do not think I have any strength left to save. The sound of cutting tools came from beyond the door. And for a terrible moment, Sareth thought more Shathan had arrived to finish them. Then she heard human voices calling out in a language she did not understand. And the door exploded inward to reveal soldiers in Earth Coalition armor who swept into the room with weapons ready. We have survivors, one of them shouted. I need a medic in here now. Sareth held Yoon's limp form and screamed for them to hurry. To save this impossible human who had given everything for someone who had offered nothing in return. The medics arrived and went to work. And Sareth refused to let go of Yoon's hand even as they carried her toward the rescue shuttle. She had mocked this human. She had called her primitive and worthless and noise in the void. She had been wrong about everything. The Shathan warrior was nearly 3 meters tall with armor, plates of black chitin that covered its insectoid body like the shell of some nightmare creature. From the depths of a dead world, its forearms ended in claws that could tear through metal. Its compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting in 1,000 fractured images. and the weapon it carried hummed with enough power to vaporize a Valorian in a single shot. Sereth saw it step around the corner and felt her legs go weak with terror, her mind screaming at her to run, even though she knew running would only delay the inevitable commander. Yoon did not run. She moved with a speed that Sereth would not have believed possible for such a small creature, crossing the distance between herself and the Shathan in the time it took the warrior to raise its weapon. The plasma pistol fired twice at point-blank range, punching through the gaps in the chitin armor where the segments joined. And the Shathan staggered but did not fall. It swung one massive arm at Yoon with enough force to crush her skull. But she was no longer there, ducking under the blow and driving her shoulder into the warrior's midsection to throw it off balance. Sereth watched in horrified fascination as the human fought, using every part of her body as a weapon, striking at weak points with elbows and knees when the pistol ran dry, staying in motion constantly so the Shathan could never land a solid blow. The warrior caught her with a glancing strike that sent her spinning into a wall, but she rolled with the impact and came up holding a shard of broken metal that she drove into one of the creature's compound eyes with savage precision. The Shathan screamed in a frequency that made Sereth's skull ache, and in its moment of agony, Yoon grabbed its own weapon and turned it against its owner. The shot tore through the warrior's head and painted the corridor with ichor that steamed in the cold. Yoon stood over the corpse, breathing heavily, fresh blood running down her face from where the glancing blow had split her skin. And she looked at Sereth with eyes that held no triumph or satisfaction. "We need to move," she said. "That shot will draw more of them." They ran. The next hour became a blur of corridors and hiding spots, of close calls and desperate scrambles through maintenance tunnels barely large enough for Sereth to squeeze through, of whispered conversations in the dark while Shathan patrols searched nearby. During one of these quiet moments, huddled in a storage compartment while armored feet marched past their hiding place, Sereth found herself asking questions she never would have considered before this night. "How do you do it?" she whispered. "How do you stay so calm when death is everywhere around us?" Yoon was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was barely audible. "I was not always calm. I learned. I had to learn. Because the alternative was to freeze and die and let down the people counting on me." "Where did you learn such things?" "Surely humans do not face danger like this in their daily lives." "Some of us do," Yoon replied. "I served in a conflict called the Proximal War. It was a civil war between human factions that lasted 3 years and killed over 20 million people. I was a combat commander on the front lines for most of it." Sarah struggled to process this information. The concept of a species fighting a war against itself seeming almost absurd to her. Valorian sensibilities. Why would humans fight each other when the galaxy is full of other threats? Because we disagreed about important things. Because some of us wanted power and others wanted freedom. Because we are not perfect and we make terrible mistakes. The same reasons any species fights. I expect. The patrol passed and they began moving again. But Sereth could not stop thinking about what Yoon had said. 20 million dead in a war between brothers and sisters of the same species. A conflict so brutal that it forged survivors like Commander Yoon into something hard and sharp and unbreakable. They encountered 2 more Shathan in the next section. And this time, Sereth watched the fight with different eyes. She saw not a primitive creature lashing out with desperate violence, but a trained warrior, applying techniques refined through countless battles. Every movement efficient, every strike calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum exposure to counterattack. Yoon killed both enemies in less than a minute. Though she took a wound to her left arm that bled freely until she wrapped it with torn fabric from her uniform. "You could have left me," Sereth said as Yoon worked on a makeshift bandage. "You could have escaped faster alone. I'm slowing you down." And you owe me nothing but contempt. Yoon finished tying off the bandage and looked at the princess with something that might have been patience or might have been pity. Your Highness, I am going to explain something that may be difficult for you to understand. I am not stupid, Sarah snapped, some of her old pride returning. I simply do not understand your motivations. Fair enough, Yoon conceded. Among humans, we have a concept we call protection. Not the kind of protection that comes from guards and walls and technology, but the personal kind. The choice that any individual can make to put themselves between danger and someone who needs help. Valorians have guards and soldiers for such purposes. Yes, you pay others to take risks for you. Humans do that too. But we also believe that protection is something anyone can choose to offer, regardless of whether they are paid or ordered or expected to. My parents were not soldiers, they were farmers. But when raiders came to our colony, they fought to protect our neighbors until help arrived. They did not ask whether those neighbors deserved protection. They simply acted because people needed help. Sareth was quiet for a long moment, turning this idea over in her mind like an unfamiliar object. And you are protecting me because I need help. Even though I am not your person to protect. Even though I showed you nothing but disrespect. Yes, that seems foolish, Yoon smiled. And for the first time, Sarah saw warmth in the expression. Maybe it is. But it is also what makes us human. We cannot always be the strongest or the smartest or the longest lived. But we can always choose to help others. We can always choose to stand between the darkness and those who cannot fight it alone. That is our gift to the galaxy. Even if the galaxy does not always appreciate it, they continued moving toward the transmitter room. And Sareth found herself thinking about all the assumptions she had made about humans. Assumptions that were crumbling with every step she took beside this strange, impossible woman. The transmitter room was 2 sections away when they heard the sounds of a large Shathan force ahead. And Yoon's face grew grim as she assessed the situation. There are at least 10 of them between us and the transmitter, she said. Probably more. This is going to be difficult. Difficult, Sareth repeated. You mean impossible. We cannot fight that many. Yoon looked at her with an expression that made Sareth's breath catch in her throat. Your Highness, I have done impossible things before. I just need you to trust me when the time comes. Can you do that? Sareth looked at the human commander, at the blood and wounds and exhaustion that marked her body, at the steady determination that still burned in her eyes despite everything they had been through. Yes, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I trust you. Yoon nodded once and began checking her stolen weapons. And Sareth realized with growing horror that the human was planning something that would probably get them both killed. The explosion tore through the orbital station with enough force to throw Princess Sareth from her feet and send her crashing against a wall that had been smooth crystal moments before, but was now cracked and bleeding sparks from damaged power conduits alarms. Screamed in 3 different frequencies as emergency lighting painted everything in shades of angry red. And somewhere in the distance, Sareth could hear the unmistakable sound of atmosphere venting into the cold vacuum of space. She pushed herself upright on shaking legs, her silver blood dripping from a cut above her left eyes, her elaborate gown torn and stained with debris dust that would have horrified her an hour ago, but now seemed completely irrelevant. The attack had come without warning. One moment the diplomatic reception had been continuing with all its tedious formality, and the next moment the station had shuddered as if struck by the fist of an angry god. And chaos had swallowed everything Sareth thought she understood about the universe. She had been separated from her guards in the first moments of panic, swept along by a crowd of terrified aliens, all pushing toward escape pods that might or might not still be functional. And then a secondary explosion had collapsed the corridor behind her, and left her alone in a section of the station she did not recognize. "Hello," she called out, hating how small and frightened her voice sounded in the smoke-filled darkness. "Is anyone there? I am Princess Sareth Valoria, and I demand assistance immediately." No one answered. Sarath stumbled forward through the ruins of what had once been an elegant observation lounge. Its massive windows, now showing nothing but emergency blast shields that had deployed to seal the breaches in the hull. She tried her communicator but received only static. Tried the emergency terminals along the walls, but found them dead or dying, their screens flickering with corrupted data that told her nothing useful. Panic began to claw at the edges of her mind, a sensation she had never truly experienced before in her privileged life. Valorian royalty did not panic because Valorian royalty was never in danger, protected always by layers of guards and technology, and the simple fact that no one in the galaxy was foolish enough to threaten the ruling family of the greatest empire in known space. But the Shafin were foolish, or perhaps brave, or perhaps simply so filled with hatred that they no longer cared about consequence. Ruth had learned of the Shafin only through history lessons that described them as a defeated enemy, a species that had challenged Valorian dominance 3 centuries ago and had been crushed so thoroughly that they were assumed to be extinct or reduced to irrelevance. Apparently, that assumption had been wrong. She heard movement ahead and froze, her heart's pounding in her chest with a rhythm that spoke of pure animal terror. A figure emerged from the smoke, and Sareth felt relief wash through her at the sight of a familiar face, even though that face belonged to someone she had treated with contempt just hours before. Commander Yoonjae looked nothing like the quiet, unassuming woman from the reception. Her gray uniform was torn and scorched, her face was smeared with blood and soot, and in her hands she carried a Valorian plasma pistol that she must have taken from a fallen guard. She moved through the wreckage with the easy confidence of someone who had seen destruction before and had learned not to fear it, her eyes scanning every shadow as if expecting enemies to leap out at any moment. "Princess Sareth," Yoon said, and her voice was calm in a way that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. "Are you injured?" Sareth wanted to respond with the same arrogance she had displayed at the reception, wanted to dismiss this human and demand that proper Valorian personnel come to her rescue. But the words would not come. "I do not know," she admitted, and she hated how weak she sounded. "My guards are gone, my communicator does not work, and I have no idea what is happening." Yoon moved closer and quickly examined Sareth's injuries with practiced efficiency, her fingers probing the cut on the princess's forehead with surprising gentleness. "The wound is superficial," Yoon announced. "You will be fine if we can get you to safety, which is what we need to focus on right now." "We," Sareth repeated with a trace of her earlier contempt. "You expect me to rely on a human for protection?" Yoon met her gaze without flinching, and something in those strained round eyes made Sareth want to look away. "Your Highness, the Shathan have attacked this station with at least 6 boarding parties, and they are specifically hunting for high-value targets like yourself. Your guards are either dead or fighting elsewhere. Your fleet is engaged with enemy warships and cannot send immediate assistance. And the only person standing between you and a very unpleasant death is me." She paused and allowed a small smile to cross her face. "We can discuss who insulted whom after we survive. Does that seem reasonable?" Sareth wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the dignity and superiority that defined her entire existence. But another explosion rocked the station and reminded her that pride was a luxury she could not currently afford. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Lead the way." Human nodded and began moving down the corridor with her weapon raised, checking corners and doorways with the automatic precision of someone who had done this many times before. Sareth followed close behind, trying to ignore the humiliation of depending on a creature she had called primitive and worthless just hours ago. They moved through sections of the station that grew increasingly damaged, stepping over bodies of Valorians and other species who had not been lucky enough to survive the initial attack, passing sealed doors that groaned against the pressure of vacuum on the other side. Twice they heard the heavy footsteps of Shathan, warriors nearby, and pressed themselves into alcoves until the danger passed. And Sereth found herself studying the human commander with reluctant curiosity. Yoon showed no fear that Sereth could detect, no hesitation or uncertainty, just the focused determination of someone who had a job to do and intended to do it regardless of the obstacles. "Why are you helping me?" Sereth finally asked during a moment of relative quiet. "I was cruel to you. I called your people vermin and suggested you were not worth the attention of civilized beings." Yoon glanced back at her with an expression that Sereth could not read. "You needed help," she said simply. "That is enough, but I insulted you in front of everyone. I mocked your species and your lifespan and everything about you. Yes, you did, and that does not make you angry. That does not make you want to leave me to the Shathan as punishment for my behavior." Yoon stopped moving and turned to face Sereth fully, and in the red emergency lighting her face looked almost alien itself, carved from shadows and determination. "Your Highness, I have been insulted by beings far more important than you. I have been shot at, stabbed, bombed, and left for dead more times than I care to remember. I have watched friends die in my arms and enemies surrender at my feet. And through all of it, I have learned one simple truth." She stepped closer, and Sereth found herself unable to move away. "What matters is not what people say about you, but what you do when it counts. Right now, what counts is getting you to safety. And that is what I intend to do, whether you appreciate it or not." She turned and continued moving down the corridor, leaving Sereth to follow in stunned silence. They were halfway to the emergency transmitter room when they encountered their first Shathan patrol. And Sereth learned very quickly that everything she thought she knew about humans was wrong. The Grand Convocation Hall stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and living stone, its walls humming with the soft energy of 1,000 floating lights that drifted like captured stars beneath a ceiling so high it vanished into golden mist. Princess Sereth Valoria stood at the center of attention, as she always did, her silver skin catching the light in ways that made lesser beings stare in wonder, her 4 eyes scanning the gathered diplomats with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no in her 200 years of life. She was the 3rd daughter of Emperor Keth Valoria the Undying, ruler of 11 star systems and commander of the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever known. And she carried herself with the absolute certainty that the universe existed primarily for her. The diplomatic summit had drawn representatives from 30 species to the Valorian throne world, a rare gathering meant to address the growing tensions along the Outer Rim territories where pirate fleets had become bold enough to strike at major shipping lines. Found most of the proceedings tedious beyond words, but her father had insisted she attend to learn the art of galactic politics. And so she drifted through the reception hall like a bored predator, searching for something to end her. She found it in the form of the human delegation. They stood apart from the other groups, a small cluster of 5 individuals in simple gray uniforms that bore none of the elaborate decorations or status markers that every other species displayed with pride. Sereth had heard of humans, but had never seen one in person until today, and she found them deeply unimpressive in every possible way. They were small, barely reaching her shoulder in height, with only 2 eyes set in flat faces covered in soft skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. They had no claws, no natural armor, no visible weapons of any kind built into their bodies, and their movements lacked the fluid grace that marked the superior species of the Galaxy Ambassador Torvik, the eldest of the human group, was speaking quietly with a Morthian trade minister when Sereth approached with her entourage of admirers trailing behind her like the tail of a comet. "So these are the famous humans," Sereth announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Valorian speech so pleasing to most ears. "I must admit, I expected something more impressive, given all the noise your species has made since stumbling into our galaxy." Ambassador Torvik turned to face her with a calm expression that Sereth found irritating, and he offered a respectful bow that was neither too deep nor too shallow. "Your Highness," he said in accented but clear Galactic standard, "it is an honor to meet you, and I thank the Valorian Empire for extending this invitation to humanity." "Yes, well, my father believes in charity toward the less fortunate," Sereth replied with a smile that held no warmth. "Though I wonder what exactly your people hope to contribute to these proceedings beyond filling empty chairs." A ripple of nervous laughter came from the aliens who had gathered to watch, most of them eager to see how the newcomer species would handle being put in their place. By Valorian Royal Tizareth noticed that one of the humans had not reacted at all to her words. A woman who stood slightly behind the ambassador with her hands clasped behind her back and her eyes fixed on some middle distance as if she were somewhere else entirely. "You there," Sereth called out, pointing one slender finger at the woman. "Do humans not teach their servants to pay attention when royalty speaks?" The woman's eyes focused on Sereth with a sharpness that surprised the princess. And for just a moment something flickered in those strange round eyes that Sereth could not identify. "Commander Yoon-ji-hae," Ambassador Torvik said quickly, "is not a servant, Your Highness, but rather my military attaché and advisor." Sereth laughed, and the sound was like crystal chimes in a cold wind. "Military attaché," she repeated with obvious amusement. "And what military wisdom could such a creature possibly offer? I wonder what wars humans have even fought, given that you have existed as a spacefaring species for barely 40 of your short years." Commander Yoon stepped forward and offered a bow identical to the one Torvik had given, her movements precise and controlled in a way that spoke of long practice. "Your Highness honors us with her attention," Yoon said, and her voice was quiet but steady, carrying no trace of the fear or anger that Sereth had expected to provoke. "Does she speak?" Sereth said to her companions with theatrical surprise. "I was beginning to think humans communicated through those ugly facial expressions alone." More laughter from the crowd, louder now as the gathered aliens sensed that a show was being performed for their entertainment. Sereth circled the human commander slowly, examining her the way one might examine an unusual insect that had wandered into a palace garden. "Tell me, Commander, how long do humans live? I have heard your species expires after barely a century, which seems hardly enough time to learn anything of value." "The average human lifespan is approximately 80 years, Yoon replied without emotion, "though many live longer with modern medical care." 80 years, Sereth repeated, letting horror creep into her voice. "Why, I have gowns older than that." "How terribly sad it must be to know that your entire existence amounts to less than a brief afternoon in the life of a Valorian." She stopped directly in front of Yoon and leaned down slightly to look into the human's eyes. "I suppose that explains why your people are in such a hurry to spread across the stars like vermin. You must reproduce constantly just to maintain your population." "How exhausting that must be." Ambassador Torvik's face had grown tight with controlled anger, but Commander Yoon's expression remained unchanged, a mask of perfect calm that Sereth found increasingly frustrating. "Perhaps Your Highness would prefer to discuss the summit agenda," Torvik suggested. "There are matters of trade and security that affect all species equally." "Equally?" Sereth laughed again. "Nothing about humans is equal to Valorians. Ambassador, your people are noise in the void, a mere curiosity that will be forgotten within 1,000 years while my empire endures for eternity." She reached out and flicked a finger against the metal that hung on Yoon's chest. A small disc of bronze metal that bore markings Sareth did not recognize. What is this? Some human toy you give to children for good behavior. It is a service commendation, Yoon answered. Awarded for actions during a conflict several years ago. How precious, Sareth said with dripping contempt. The humans have little wars among themselves and give each other prizes for participation. Truly your species represents the finest the galaxy has to offer. She turned away dismissively. Already bored with the game, I suggest you return to whatever backwater world spawned you. Commander, the adults have important matters to discuss, and I would hate for you to feel overwhelmed by concepts your primitive brain cannot grasp. Ambassador Torvik stepped forward with a diplomatic smile that did not reach his eyes. Your Highness should perhaps not judge too quickly, he said. Humans have a saying about books and covers that might apply here. Sareth waved her hand as if brushing away an annoying insect. I have no interest in human sayings. Ambassador, now if you will excuse me, I see some actual civilized beings I should greet. She swept away with her entourage, leaving the human delegation standing alone in a pocket of uncomfortable silence. Commander, Yoon watched the princess go with that same unreadable expression, and only Ambassador Torvik stood close enough to hear the words she spoke under her breath. Some lessons are learned the hard way. 12 hours later, the first Shathan warship emerged from hyperspace above the throne world, and the galaxy changed forever.